Hey, good morning. Welcome to today's skill session from PeopleCert, powered by Techstrong. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Peters. Today we're talking about how to apply DevSecOps practices in the multi-cloud era. Today on our panelists, we have Mark Hornbeek, Melissa Sussman, and myself. Before we get started, I want to let all of you know that this program is live and being recorded again so that you can view it on demand as necessary. Also, there's chat and QA boxes on the right of the screen where you can communicate with the general audience and chat questions. We'll take those questions as they come in and work them in. If we don't get a lot of questions, then we'll go through our prepared script and work from there. First off, let's start with some introductions so you can know who we are and who you're talking to. Melissa, if you'd like to start.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Sussman. I work for Sumo Logic as the lead technical evangelist. Yeah.
All right. Mark Hornbeek.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mark Hornbeek. I have a little consulting firm called Engineering DevOps Consulting. So we do obviously DevOps consulting mostly with large enterprises and institutions, which includes sort of strategic road mapping and transformations. And I also am an educator and instructor working with Learning Tree and the DevOps Institute, which is now part of PeopleCert. I also do content for RFPs and marketing at various firms. That's who I am. I'm based in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico.
Thank you. Well, I'm Dr. Mark Peters. I'm based in San Antonio, Texas. I am also a DevOps Institute ambassador, I guess a PeopleCert ambassador now. A lot of work with DevOps, did 22 years in the Air Force. I've got two big dogs, which hopefully will not interfere with our panel today at all, but we'll see how that goes. So with all those kind of things underway, we'll start off and we'll kind of say, why should I use the multi-cloud environment? What are the drivers that are pushing you into this multi-cloud? And again, Melissa, I'll let you start off.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's a lot of advantages. You have sort of increased resilience over essentially not using the cloud at all. You have flexibility, the ability to actually leverage even unique strengths from different cloud providers. Azure has its own whole ecosystem pretty much. But if you're familiar with using a lot of scripting and Lambda functions, you want to customize certain things, AWS is good. There's by diversifying your cloud portfolio, basically you kind of can avoid vendor lock-in, and then you can optimize costs also by selecting the most efficient provider for specific tasks. But also just it kind of helps ensure things like business continuity and the ability to scale up and down by spreading out your resources across different platforms. And a lot of people use these really highly federated models, especially in enterprise.
Mark, anything you want to add?
Well, that covers a lot. I mean, basically, I think of multi-cloud in general having three types of use cases. So, and Melissa mentioned at least two of them. So cost efficiency and the flexibility types of things, the ability to, mix and match their choice of services depending on the costs, and optimizing performance and geographical reach is another one. Some of the cloud providers have better offerings than others, and you can take advantage of which, if your services are available in multi-cloud, then you can take advantage of that. But in particular, regarding the topic of today, the DevSecOps aspect, risk management, disaster recovery is helped a lot if you can, let's say, support a security event, by there's an attack on some portion of your multi-cloud environment, you can instead take that down and cover it with, another portion. So it offers some advantages from a point of view of DevSecOps and security and risk in that regard.
I was going to mention the disaster recovery if you didn't throw that in there, right? As a security guy, you always want to talk about disaster recovery.
Yeah.
And having multiple options is always good.
Mm-hmm.
I was on an AWS webinar not too long ago, and even AWS was advocating, you may want to look at another vendor for part of your disaster recovery, just to kind of store your data, not to do everything you want to do, but to kind of have that option in the future. We always have to go back to the good story. There was one about NotPetya when it came out with Maersk, which was one of the shipping companies, and it took down all their computers, and they couldn't find anything that was up and running. They didn't have any cloud backups that were not affected by the NotPetya. And they actually found that they had one company down in Nigeria that was offline running some system upgrades at the time the virus went through and destroyed the rest of their computers. And they were able to take the backup from there and actually move it in a hard copy back up to England, where they could restore a lot of their other functions in a lot of their backups. So obviously multi-cloud would get us away from having that other one and hopefully have a different environment that was not affected or is affected in as wide of a sense in the aspect. And also I'd say as we move into maybe some of the significant challenges, one of the things is some of the cloud environments are a little bit different than the others. If you're developing in an AWS versus an Azure versus a Google, you may have different functions or different libraries that you're calling on. You need to make sure those work as you go from customer to customer, especially as you want some enterprise-wide investigations. So, Mark, what are some of those challenges that you see in working with multi-clouds and working with different environments?
Well, one of the challenges is that you're dealing with obviously different cloud service providers. They each have, there's no standard, interface for all of these, and they don't all have exactly the same capabilities. So you have to have a real enterprise strategy for, what portions of these different services you're going to use and how are you going to integrate them together. So things like selecting tools, you want to make sure that you're using tools that can work across multiple cloud environments. I mean, things like HashiCorp's tools are examples of that. Some tools are, more appropriate for one cloud or another, but if you choose those, then you're going to have to build your own layer on top of them, and it makes it more complex. So integrating tools is a big one. You're going to, there's complexity, obviously, when you're dealing with multiple cloud environments. So you're going to have the expertise for each of the cloud environments enough that you can diagnose and take advantage as well of the different features at the same time, providing unified services to your clients. So those are just a couple. I guess I could go on, but those are some examples.
Melissa?
Yeah, I would say you covered like all the main bases. Obviously, issues around complexity and managing a bunch of different varied environments. Like each cloud platform has its own, features and unique things going on. The tool integration piece of it is also challenging. Sounds like I would also kind of go into like for this compliance and security. So a lot of the security and compliance standards are another sort of challenge to consider, but it's also, I think, having a multi-cloud platform helps with that to some extent. Also, a lot of the cloud platforms, whether it's like using the AKS or EKS or whatever environment, a lot of them are just built on top of Kubernetes. And so there's like a lot of attack vectors that you can have in a Kubernetes environment. And I think those can also present challenges. I mean, obviously within the containers, like someone had mentioned, you had mentioned, Mark, about having disaster recovery. That could happen, if if there's some kind of weather event, but it also can happen if like there's malicious code within, let's say, a container or container image. There's also things to consider, like whatever the is happening within like a host operating system. Each cloud provider has their own like VMs. They use their own operating systems. Like Amazon uses their AMIs. You can also have attack vectors in things like your network layer and the API layer. There's a lot of challenges because you have to be highly vigilant of everything in your environment.
We have the standard of cloud cluster container and code, right? As we build our processes out. Maybe one of the challenges is you have any good stories about moving a customer into a multi-cloud DevSecOps. The one we had recently is we were using the Rancher in a Kubernetes instance. We were using the Rancher Kubernetes, the RKE, and had to move to EKS for a different client that they wanted it. So we had to do some of the shifts and some of the basic controls, and some of those things weren't. That's a more simpler type investigation, really within the same cloud, but still showing some of those different tools. Any good stories about a customer moving into a multi-cloud and having some challenges?
Many.
And do you want to share?
Good may not be the right answer in some cases, but yeah, challenges for sure. But I've a number of clients, since I'm the DevOps guy, is moving their DevOps environments to multi-cloud, trying to pick tools that will work across the different multi-cloud environments, because you're deploying code from the cloud as well as to the cloud, both, and trying to come up with not too many variations of tools at the same time, provide kind of a unified service to all the developers and operations people within the company is a challenge. So the first step is getting everybody aligned with the idea and just getting strategic alignment with the people is more than the technology tends to be a bigger problem. Like, why are you doing this? Like, there's obviously a big picture goal at the enterprise level to save money and not to take advantage of all the advantages we mentioned. But when you get down to the individuals in the company, it's like, why are we doing this? This is adding complexity. So the people challenge is often the biggest one, and then the technologies choices and implementations of automation and all that tend to follow it. Not to say there aren't a lot of challenges with that as well. And probably most importantly, once you have it all, then sustaining it, right? Making something that is not only working once for the demo, but actually working on an ongoing basis with all the different layers of automation involved. So a lot of people don't really want to, as a consultant, I often see people don't want to pay for the sustaining aspect up front, or they don't even want to plan for it. But in the end, that's probably the biggest total cost of ownership, is making sustainable solutions for multi-cloud.
I say one of the problems to address with clouds is you have the three A's, right? That when people want cloud, they want more awareness, they want more access, and then they want to abdicate all their responsibilities that they have for it and let someone else take care of it for them.
Exactly.
That you got to get away from that third one as you move forward. How about you, Melissa? Any good stories about moving a client to multi-cloud?
Yeah, I think we have several at Sumo. I would say like one that I think comes to mind right now, just because we have like AWS reInvent right now and all this other stuff happening with AWS, is Alaska Airlines. So like they were moving to they were basically like moving to multi-cloud environments, and we were able to actually use our global intelligence suite for Kubernetes to basically like help them manage things like the complexity of their environments, kind of manage the unknown unknowns. But also, it's like an AI feature that basically looks at like all of the looks at aggregated security data. Right now, we also have this like really cool feature for security insights called the Insight Trainer, and it basically like uses machine data analytics to essentially like parse through all of the different insights and then surface the ones that are most actionable. So it kind of helps with dealing with like the client's alert fatigue, but then also it helps with surfacing like the most important security insights, that are most likely to be the most important according to the data that we have on said client. And so like that I think is kind of a big success story. Because again, like any organization that's of a large size, has a lot of complexity, has a lot of specific needs, like they're going to have things like shadow IT changes. They're going to have things like potentially, even in a big cloud environment, even a multi-cloud environment, they're going to want to have some observability on that. And then also from a security standpoint, they're going to also want to be able to deal with really fast mean time to recovery, mean time to remediation. And it kind of helps having like something that can kind of help surface the most likely security insights that they should be looking at first. So, yeah.
I had a boss one time, and his favorite comment was, the answer to complexity is not simplicity, but stability. It's okay to have some complexity as long as we can manage it and be stable across those various things that we're doing and have a consistent approach to it, even if it is slightly complex in how we do it. That just means we have better people that can handle that complexity along the way, right? We just have to resolve those bottlenecks and kind of resolve those issues as we drive it forward. So with that, with some of these challenges, do you think multi-cloud is for everyone? Should every retailer or developer or DevSecOps person out there seek a multi-cloud implementation, or is there a different way to go about it?
I guess I'll just say no. No. If you're not like a really large organization, or you don't really if you don't need to have a largely federated model, if you don't need to have things like risk diversification, if you don't necessarily need to ensure sort of a lot of, implement, if you don't have the ability to do things like implement centralized government policies, if you don't have the ability to manage multi-cloud platforms, it's probably not for you.
Yeah, absolutely agree with all of what you just said. I mean, it's frankly, it's mostly for larger enterprises that have the resources and expertise. Otherwise, if you're a small organization that pretty much, it would be crazy to go multi-cloud. It would just be too difficult. But on the other hand, if even if you're a large organization or even a portion of the organization that has simple workloads, you may not get all of the values from multi-cloud if your applications are very simple workloads. So it depends on the application, frankly.
So I think the only drivers I see for kind of multi-cloud obviously for a large enterprise, it makes more sense, but from a small side would be maybe in that disaster recovery of knowing that you have a backup somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Or maybe if you want to be a small vendor, right? If you have a tool that's in an AWS marketplace, maybe you want it to be in an Azure marketplace or an Android marketplace, and run on these different environments and these different instances where you can see it. Would you say that's a fairly accurate, or have you seen companies using it that are smaller that have driven themselves to multi-cloud?
Yeah, what I often hear people get confused is when they say, if you say, are you multi-cloud? They'll say yes, but then you dive into details. No, they're using different clouds for different things. It's not true multi-cloud where an application is working, equivalently across multiple clouds. So I think a lot of people confuse those two things, right? So there may be a lot of organizations that I think are, using different cloud service providers for different things. And maybe they also have some applications that work across the different clouds. So, and that's totally valid. Just because you go multi-cloud with some applications doesn't mean you have to do it for everything.
Yeah, I agree. I would say like universities maybe might do something like that. Like they use a bunch of different cloud environments for different things. Or they have to figure out a way to scale up and down. Let's say they want to teach what I've seen is like they want to teach everybody how to use an FPGA or something. So they want to go and use like the Amazon machine instances that are running on like GPUs and FPGAs, but the university doesn't want to pay for like $10,000 boards. So they just like scale up and down the classes according to the number of students in each class. And then they're like, okay, great, we're done. We used multi-cloud.
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, another example is if you've got, even a big enterprise, and acquisitions going on, they acquire some new product or service that's running on different clouds than you're using today, and they decide to continue to do that. As long as it's a conscious decision, I think it's fine, right? As long, you have to decide in each case what makes sense. And in some cases,
I think you see sometimes with the smaller vendors that they'll say they have multi-cloud, but they have two separate AWS instances, or they're running a sandbox and test, and those are both in different private clouds on AWS or different private clouds on Azure or something. They're like, well, we have multi-cloud because we have two different clouds, but they're really not maybe what we define as a true multi-cloud environment where you have different service providers or different cloud providers at those instances as they drive forward. With that, we kind of blend into that. How do you ensure that you get compliance then as you're doing DevSecOps with those varying security standards when dealing with multiple cloud providers? Is there a common way to do it, or is it an integration, or how do we kind of move forward in those areas?
Well, kind of the same point, right? There are different standards, regulations. So every cloud provider, you may have to implement in different ways in order to validate and verify compliance. Generally speaking, my approach has been to prioritize compliance as some kind of core feature, not an afterthought, because oftentimes it's left to like later in the transformation. So you want to use some of the tools that really are multi-cloud capable from the get-go, and then automate compliance as much as possible, because if you thought compliance validation and data validation was difficult in the single cloud, then it's only going to multiply with multi-cloud. So you better have a lot of automation in place for compliance. If it was a good idea with single cloud, then it's a must-have with multi-cloud. Certainly supporting regular audits and adopting strict compliance standards is pretty much impossible without the automation layer for compliance.
That sounds like a shift left and a continuous monitoring for observability. Those sound like our good DevSecOps terms, right?
That's true.
I think you covered like all the main points. I don't think I have a lot. I mean, because obviously you want centralized government policies. You want to regularly audit and review your compliance. You want to basically leverage observability tools that specialize in things like compliance management. You want to do security orchestration and automation. So those are all ways that you can definitely ensure compliance. I mean, I think that there's also just like a lot of random best practices, I guess you could do. There's I mean, there's compliance, and then there's the security aspects, right? And so, one thing that you can do that could be running in compliance, but also just sort of a general security best practice is like you can run your containers in non-root. You know, you can make sure that your RBAC is granular, so least access first. That's a compliance thing, but it's also just like a best practice, like common sense thing. You can create comprehensive, systematic testing. You can obviously, everybody says shift left. So do all the changes possible before pushing code to production. Don't wait until production to then implement, dozens of changes, people. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of best practices to just ensure compliance.
Maybe
Yeah, go
one of
ahead.
those challenges is how do we get the compliance to a central point, right? If we're running a multi-cloud environment, so we got these different things, how do we get that back to a central point so that we don't have separate compliance folks running around in these different environments doing different things and moving us in divergent directions rather than in the similar direction?
I think that's getting into the next thing, which is, I think, tools, basically, right?
Well, what are some of the tools and technologies that we use? Are there some
Mark?
good ones you found?
Well, okay, so I want to touch on the point you just made, though, having centralized compliance. And this is something I often find folks don't put enough effort into. And I've kind of got to the point in my consulting practice that if an organization will not invest in centralized monitoring and performance management, then I really don't even want to work with them anymore because it becomes a big mess, and it's not sustainable, right? If you can't measure the performance and the compliance and against whatever your standards are, and they can be enterprise specific standards, is fine, but you want to have some common goals. Otherwise, it's just chaos. So, what tools to use? There isn't really out of the box a whole lot of tools that can keep track of all the different value streams across all the different pipelines, across all the different applications and services. So at this point in time, what I've come to realize is that you pretty much have to do your own thing. You can take advantage of some of the value stream management platforms, or take advantage of some of the application and release automation tools, and consolidate data. But at some point, you're going to need a common data lake. You're going to need a way to collect the data from the different tools in real time, not just because somebody wrote a ticket. And you're going to have to be able to customize the outputs depending on whether you're a consumer that's an auditor for compliance, or an operational person or a developer. They all need to look at the same data to be able to act on it if there's compliance invalid activities going on, or just monitoring what's going on. So this is a big deal in my mind, and a lot of organizations are not doing it very well. They'll have good monitoring compliance capabilities and automation for one or two applications, but not across the board. Doing it for the whole enterprise or whole institution is challenging. But I think this has become clear to me, at least, that this is critical, and is often deficient in many organizations. They'll invest in automation of the tasks, but not in the monitoring and the compliance well enough. So it's a big deal, and I think it's going to become even more and more important. As we see more and more security breaches and consequences of that, people are getting more and more interested in how do you control it, and control requires observability, like you said. Without the observability, you really are out of control. So that you hit on a sore point for me when you asked that question.
Well, those are good. Those are good discussion points.
Yeah.
A SOAR point, SOAR.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, SOAR and XDRs and SIEMs and all that have a role to play, but they don't really cover the whole spectrum of things when you're looking at the entire set of activities across a value stream and all the different pipelines for all the different services. The SOARs tend to be focused more on the ops side of things, and unfortunately DevSecOps, the title of this webinar is, doesn't really say much about ops, right? It's DevSecOps is more about supporting security deployment, security prevention activities in preventing new vulnerabilities from being deployed. But once you get into ops and production, that's really SecOps, and SOARs and XDRs and SIEMs and all of those platforms tend to be more SecOps oriented or infrastructure oriented. I personally have a feeling that there should be something more like a continuous security, which combines the practices of DevSecOps and SecOps, because they can learn a lot from each other. I went to the RSA conference earlier this year in San Francisco, and there still is a big line in my mind when I walk to the different booths, vendors. The SecOps guys say one thing, the DevSecOps guys say something else, and that's almost the first question you ask. Are you a DevSecOps or a SecOps? And depending on what the answer, then you know what kind of questions to ask, because they're very different. They're really not of one mind yet. I think that's a huge deficiency in industry, and to get around that, we do need better monitoring at the enterprise and institution level that doesn't just cover development, but also in production security combined.
Well,
listen, tools and technologies.
Tools and technologies. Yeah. So we already touched on automation and orchestration tools. You want consistent deployment. You want consistent management. I think like monitoring and logging tools, because I work for a monitoring and logging company. So you can do open telemetry, obviously, for unified observability. That's a good, general best practice right now. I think it's mature enough that people should just be using it. Kubernetes also obviously has a lot of like security features. But there's also going to just be a lot of the time like unknown unknowns. So if you still need to know things like, are you over provisioning? Are you under provisioning? You also need to parse through like a ton of alerts, like I was saying before. Bringing in a monitoring tool that uses AI models trained on crowdsourcing that global intelligence data to surface the most relevant security insights first definitely helps. Having a security tool that can help with like pod security policies, network encryption, RBAC, all of that is like good stuff that Kubernetes just has. But I would also say, like, from a monitoring and logging perspective, you still want to be able to see things like, is there some kind of impossible travel scenario? Is there also, like, as far as the unknown unknowns are concerned, have there been changes to production that were like not, documented? Were there, those shadow IT changes? So I mean, all of those are great tools to use.
Yeah, maybe I would add, because you're touching more on the production ops side of it, tooling, but also on the dev side of tooling. Some of the scanners are better at scanning containers and these software bombs and things like that, sourcing and the various forms of tools for automating pen testing as well. All of that needs to be integrated into the pipelines, and it doesn't matter whether the pipeline is delivering to multi-cloud or not, but certainly if it is, it better be, because it's going to be especially complex if you don't try to prevent the security vulnerabilities from getting out there. If you have to then patch multiple clouds, things of that nature. In general, just using containers is a big one, right? I mean, a lot of organizations are still not fully using containers, and if you're not, then you're going to have to deal with a lot of different, cloud-specific tools to deploy. So that's an important one in general. Like, as you say, using Kubernetes for orchestrating containers, but just containerizing applications alone is an important thing. So those are some dev side concerns with tooling.
Yeah.
So big fan of OTel, right? Using OTel on your thing is a cloud native deployment. Like you said, it's fairly mature, and you can run into other things to build metrics and build good observability about what's going on, and kind of cross those monitoring and logs into something that alerts or tells you what's happening next. Just to throw a buzzword in there, how does multi-cloud structures affect your chaos engineering when you're planning for what could go wrong?
It's chaotic. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, chaos engineering, more and more organizations seem to be trying to practice it with varying degrees of success. But certainly, if it's chaos in a single cloud, then multi-cloud has lots of new potential for chaos. So the chaos experiments tend to be, more complex again, and again, a lot more automated. And the consequences of, there's a lot more failure modes that you need to be worried about. At the same time, there's a lot more, recovery and mitigation modes that you can take advantage of. So that's a double-edged sword.
Right.
So designing chaos engineering or engineering chaos experiments for multi-cloud is certainly a fun topic, actually. And you certainly want to consider it as part of your multi-cloud strategy. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the people look at things like Chaos Monkey tools, but of course they're very single cloud oriented with AWS. So you're going to end up having to go to some of the commercial tool vendors like a Gremlin that at least purport to be more multi-cloud, or do your own thing. Or,
Right. How do we show failover from one cloud to the other?
Right.
If we want something to continue.
Yeah. These are complex experiments,
Melissa?
but very important.
I would say with chaos engineering, again, this is like going back to the whole shift left concept, because you're something else that you might want to implement is like synthetic tools, synthetic monitoring tools. So like basically being able to test what things are going to look like, or like what the issues might be that you might run into prior to pushing code to production with synthetic monitoring is another sort of chaos engineering thing that you can do. Of course, there's, like you said, like there was I guess Gremlin is more looking at like issues within code and sort of like general like QC, quality control, as opposed to like QA, which is like, more just quality assurance when somebody's actually using the product. So the synthetic monitoring tool will help you do more like QA kind of stuff. Also, I guess with chaos engineering, I think a lot of the time that term still needs to be pushed and like requested from like the people at the top of an organization, because I think a lot of developers don't necessarily feel that the onus is on them to actually do all of the quality control and the quality assurance. So like, I think that there needs to be a push from the top, maybe from your CISO, maybe from your CIO, I don't know, to basically like say, hey, this is important. But I've only ever seen that work in top-down initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the whole topic of chaos engineering is another one of my pet peeves, because I think a lot of folks that are diving into chaos engineering without having practices in place for design for reliability are missing the point as well. They're kind of saying, okay, well, we're going to leave it up to testing to find the problems. I mean, a lot of these things can be thought experiments as part of your design and should be mitigated up front, rather than trying to discover them later. You probably could have figured it out in the first place. I think some of the industries have got it right. They do a lot of simulations before they even write a lot of code. And they do a lot of, I feel like, chaos engineering experiments at the design level rather than waiting for having code in production. And frankly, I see that as, if you can do that, there's a lot of value. Otherwise, it's going to cost you a lot of time to fix things after you've already developed the code.
Yeah.
Melissa, you mentioned synthetic monitoring. I'm not sure I'm real familiar with that term. Can you dive into that one a little bit for us?
Yeah, there's a lot of companies that do this. I know like we have partners that do this. I would say like Catchpoint definitely is a good example of this. I think Kentic from a network monitoring perspective is a good example of this. Like basically, let's say that you can do your, like, let's say real user monitoring, or you can basically have a tool like Subo that does that. But then let's say that you want to like test and make sure that, I don't know, there isn't going to be like a long task delay or something like that. Rather than being able to observe that in production, like when something is out there and available publicly, like there was an issue that was it's publicly known now that Ulta had. It's like one of our customers, but like you want to be able to test that before like people are already trying to check out and and putting things in their cart. But by doing sort of like a fake interaction, a synthetic interaction, where like before that goes out to production, you test and make sure that like the process of putting an item into your cart, all the items into your cart and that, they get charged properly, and that there aren't things like, delays or issues when you're clicking on the page. And all of that QA testing can be done synthetically now. And that's what we mean by synthetic monitoring, and people should do it.
You're talking kind of the digital twin model, right? Where I set up a digital duplicate of what I have before it actually goes out to the next one.
I guess in a sense,
sample of the cart.
It's looking at the experience, like the user experience, the digital customer experience, but before a customer actually touches it, essentially.
You've used it in Defense Department implementations for like planes and stuff, right? You want to test that the software that you're going to put onto a plane is good before you ever actually put it onto a plane. So you build a digital model and you run it in something that shows which systems it might touch in the process. That you said this thing you put on won't ever touch the flight systems, but then you verify in that digital twin that it won't ever touch the flight systems before you go out and actually test it on that next operational step.
It sounds like the same thing, but maybe for like Department of Defense. I've never worked in the Department of Defense.
Well, synthetic engineering is also just useful to make sure that your monitoring systems are working, among other things, right? I mean, which is really important. If you can't trust your monitoring systems, then you're kind of in trouble.
Just testing the right things at the right time.
Right. Are you getting the accurate data consistently over time? And yeah, so I think that's also something that isn't done enough or well enough quite often. And learn a lot about synthetic monitoring.
We talk a lot about DevOps being a culture and being a human-based approach to a lot of things. So how do we deal with, or how have you dealt with, in your experience, fostering collaborations between DevOps and security teams, or the DevSecOps teams, when they're dealing with a multi-cloud architecture or multi-cloud deployments?
This problem exists whether it's multi-cloud or not, but definitely, becomes more important with multi-cloud, because you now have presumably different departments that are focused on the different cloud vendors having to work with each other more and more collaboratively. So if you're looking at a transformation towards, DevSecOps in multi-cloud, I apply the same, what I call the 7-step transformation process, which begins with getting leadership alignment, getting them to agree on what their missions are, the goals, and something that's measurable, and then getting their, the leadership to provide a very documented, well articulated vision for everybody to follow. Something that's not a big Bible, but is public, that at least lays out the major tactics and strategies and goals, and some kind of a timeline. I find until you get to that level of documented intentions, it's really hard to get people to collaborate. They're all going to go off in different directions because they all think what they're doing is the most important thing. So if you can have a consistent leadership across the transformation, then it's going to get you a lot further, a lot faster. Otherwise, you've got chaos in the ranks and a lot of good stuff happening. But if it's happening in different directions simultaneously, it all adds up to nothing and probably won't even be sustainable. So I really I have a lot of clients to say, oh, let's skip the leadership and alignment step and go straight to implementing tools. And as soon as I hear that, then I say, thank you very much. But as a client, you're fired. I can't deal with it. It won't work. We'll do a whole lot of things for some years and it'll all fall apart. So you really need to get that alignment.
You need both bottom up and top down. You need to have your developers, your DevSecOps teams aligned with what's coming and pushing it at the same time. Leadership from the top down is accepting that it's something that's needed in driving those kind of changes.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of that though is mostly leadership though, because like even in that example, I think you still have basically a training issue. So you want to basically encourage the teams, like even the developers or whatever, to understand the roles and the challenges of everyone else in the organization. What are the legal challenges? What are the different compliance things that they need to do? I mean, this isn't only developers. This is like across the whole organization, right?
Well, training, I would say training is an essential part of implementing a culture shift, but in and of itself, it doesn't shift culture. It's really, like you said, the leadership and what they say. Really most organizations, their cultures are reflective of the leadership. And so it really, really, really is important that the leadership takes ownership for setting a vision for things like the multi-cloud transformation, along with everything else that goes with it as well, right? So it's a big job. They get the big bucks, they should do the job. And, things like putting in place budgets for training. So you've got people that have common, at least knowledge, foundation level at least, uh, common terminology so they can collaborate better, some common metrics. I think that's the next step, making sure you've got common, not just goals, but ways of measuring that everybody can point at and compare each other to. So not to criticize, but rather to figure out how do we do things better. If you see another team doing things better, then you want to run over and learn from them. That type of thing will foster collaboration.
Training doesn't stop, right? The cultural emphasis has to be included on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that you have to continue to re-emphasize that this is the culture we want and these are the things that we're driving towards. And if you stop emphasizing those and say, we've completed our journey, then you tend to fall back to the old habits.
Yeah, I would say training isn't everything, but the thesis here is that like it encourages those team members to understand the roles and the challenges that the other teams have. So like I think that sometimes I've seen this in organizations where there's like almost a level of like chauvinism that comes from some of the developer teams.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like, they just don't even want to do security.
Yeah, I'm an instructor for the DevOps Institute, and the Learning Tree is one of their partners. And it always amazes me when I get into a class on, let's say, continuous testing. It's a cert class, one of their cert classes, or DevSecOps for that matter. Every time if it's a class that people were required to go to, the dev people say, well, I don't know really why I'm here because those are the QI guys and I don't, I'm not responsible for testing. They are. And by the time they finish the class, they realize, wait a minute. Yeah, actually we're all in this together. And, we need to figure out how to do this more efficiently and effectively to meet our overall goals. Otherwise, there's going to be problems. So, but yeah, it's incredible how many people have these siloed thoughts about what their own jobs are, and until you get in front of the explanation, they don't get it.
The two most often I see are, we want CI/CD, we want a CI/CD pipeline. This is the CI/CD pipeline we're implementing, and by the way, we have 3 change management approvals that you have to get that are manual, where they have to meet a board and be voted on before they can be moved into production. Mm-hmm. And the other one on top of that is that we've gone DevOps. We want everything to flow. We want everything to be agile, but we want to see your Gantt chart for when you're going to deliver the next release.
Yep, those are good ones for sure.
Yeah. Fostering collaboration. So yeah, it sounds like we've covered a few topics. Breaking down silos. I honestly do think that training helps break down silos, and I don't mean I mean more like getting skills across different orgs kind of helps break down those silos. I think also having like processes, that are standardized across an organization kind of helps reduce that complexity. People might think, oh, it adds complexity, but like, no, it really reduces complexity in the long run and from a system level. And then obviously, like, I think that there's a lot of considerations in terms of workflows and, depending on your organization size and needs. So especially in multi-cloud environments. So I think you also want to choose like, well, how do we want to deliver? What are the tools that we want to use? You want to actually have the opinion of like a bunch of different people in the room when doing that, not just the people at the top. So choosing those tools and delivery models like as a across different organizations is really important to foster collaboration. Because they don't feel ownership. They don't feel ownership otherwise.
One mistake I do see happening too frequently, frankly, is people will recognize the value of training and they'll send like their ops team to training or their dev team to training, but not the combination together. And that's where the real value comes in. If you actually have a mixed audience where they can see leverage each other in the training. So I like the idea of having foundation level training for the mixed audience, and then when you get into tool specific stuff, then immersive training is fine, but really the foundation level training I think is the most important, where everybody gets common terminology, common understanding of best practices and things of that nature, um, and do that together.
So that sparks a question for me of, do we see the multi-cloud drive coming just from leadership of, oh, we need a different cloud, or do we see it emerging from the lower level teams of, we need more clouds to be able to do more things?
My own experiences is mostly top down. It's the big picture. The big picture benefits are what's driving it more than the individuals. Other than the individuals may have preferences for a particular cloud that they're used to working with. So that's not the right reason to choose multi-cloud, right? um, so the valid reasons I think tend to be top down.
I
All right,
think I agree with this. I would say it's mostly led by the top down, but in order to give the people, like let's say your CISO, your CIO, like they're supposed to be the ones establishing that culture, putting together the training, like at least not the whole training programs, but like putting, deciding on who goes and like why and like how the different teams are supposed to interact together, what the delivery models should be. So they're the ones actually creating that environment. But then also like the ones deciding on like agile best practices and implementing them, like all of that is top down. But I would say in order to make the like people at a director level, management level, like middle management level, to feel that they have a sense of ownership and like fully buy into the things that are coming from the top down, I think like you still need to like consult with those groups, because those are the people who are going to end up using all the different tools that the CISO or CIO are going to end up wanting to purchase.
Yeah, and this is kind of similar to the problem of, you hear people say, well, you should let people choose their own tools because they're autonomous teams and, they let them work the way they want to. And then you end up with, 70 different types of tools that do the same thing in the same organization. You can't get any leverage. So there has to be a top-down strategy that complements this idea. So yeah, you want people to be able to use tools that they're familiar with, but if they're not familiar with it, basically train them and then they'll be familiar with them after you choose the tools. I like the idea of Lalu's principle that, when you make a key decision, it needs to involve some experts as well as people that are all the different stakeholders as much as possible. But fundamentally, in the end, it's leadership that has to decide.
You don't want to hire a new CTO who's just come from Azure and you're an AWS shop and he says, well, we're going to move everything into Azure. And he gets so much pushback that he says, well, we're just going to run both clouds because I like Azure and these people like the AWS. And now we're in a multi-cloud by default rather than by design, right? We haven't made the architectural decisions that are needed to support us as we go to multi-cloud. So that kind of leads into my next question. Does tracking success in the multi-cloud use all the same measurements, or should I use customized metrics for those clouds? How do I compare and measure success I'm having in one cloud, maybe into those multi-cloud environments?
Do you want me to go first, or you want to go, Melissa?
Either way. Well, I'll let Melissa go.
Okay. We've usually done with Mark first. I was like, whatever, either way. But I would say you definitely want to establish those KPIs early, and kind of like continue to repeat them organizationally, because again, the onus is on the people at the top. I think you want to also make sure that you have like sort of overarching metrics for overall performance. I mean, there's, just standard, well-known metrics around that Google has established, like for websites and website deployments and all of that as well. So, I mean, just kind of using those standard best practices, I would say like that kind of allows you to have analysis of each cloud while also trying to maintain sort of a holistic view of that multi-cloud performance. I think examples of that for like web performance, I think regardless of which cloud you're using, I think when we're looking at the software as a service model, you want to be able to use like Core Web Vitals. You want to be able to drill down into if there are things like long task delays. You also have like SLOs and SLIs that you need to be able to track and decide on really early on. I think Netflix does an excellent job of this, by the way. Like I've never worked with or for any, I don't even know if we have Netflix as a customer, honestly. Like I have nothing to do with Netflix, but like, that's why they're so good at what they do. They basically build a lot of their own DevOps in-house, and they do such a good job of like maintaining servers up and running, maintaining like those core web vitals going. They do such a good job with SLOs and SLIs. And across the industry, I would say like people try their best to live up to that standard.
Mark?
Yeah. So metrics, I think Melissa alluded to it. The Google so-called, I don't know if you're referring to the DORA metrics. To me, I see those as senior metrics that are like the minimum set. There's four metrics that apply to a lot of different dimensions of thinking, including security, when you stretch your imagination a little bit, right? So basically, mean time to deploy, mean time to or deploy frequency rates, and the failure rates, and mean time to recover. So at least those four, right, should be implemented in a consistent way across all the different clouds environments. So that would be a starting point. I mean, the next ones would be, I think, along the lines of what Melissa said, the SRE type thinking of metrics that are more service oriented, SLOs and SLIs across multi-cloud. If the service oriented, then implementing them may have some challenges across different cloud service providers, but that's the right thing to do, because that's how your customers view the world and for individual services. So to me, that would be like the minimum set, is get the DORA metrics working across all the different clouds, and establish SLOs and SLIs. Of course, there's an infinite number of possible SLOs and SLIs. I mean, Melissa also mentioned the Netflix, which has literally, they're monitoring thousands of things, so you can't start that way, but over the course of time you can build up your repertoire of SLOs and SLIs. And other than that, you've got domain specific metrics. Certainly in the security world, there's lots of things to measure, but I'd say start with those as a beginning. And even in the SLOs SLI space, start with availability as probably the key thing to focus on.
I always like to add the caveat that the metrics you have should be actionable. That metrics that aren't actionable are just noise, right? That the metrics have to lead to an action on your part. Whatever you're measuring or having a metric that you're showing should drive a decision from you, whether it's I need to change this, or I need to leave this the same, or this metric isn't telling me anything, I can dump it and move on to something else.
That's a key point, right? I mean, a lot of folks say, yeah, we're implementing SRE, and they stop at implementing the SLIs, but they don't go far enough to implement the other concept of SRE, which is the error budgets and error budget policies in particular, which predetermines what actions you're going to take, depending on how if you breach your SLIs and your SLOs. It's very, very important. And if you can get it down to that point, then it makes it a lot easier to monitor as well, because then you can just look at your burn rates for your error budgets rather than having domain specific things to look at all over the place.
Right.
But yeah, I don't want to use too many acronyms. DORA, SLI, SLO. So I was like just trying to, I don't know.
So
and then we end up with the alphabet
DevOps
soup
Research
issue.
Association, and SLI is service level indicator, service level agreement, SLA, SLO, service level objective. And we go from SLI, which is the first, to SLO to SLA. And then SRE, which is the site reliability engineer.
Reliability management. I don't know.
Sorry about that.
No, I started doing that too, and I was trying not to, and then I just realized,
it gets hard. You slip back into the native language and the jargon. And we had the discussion before, so luckily we haven't slipped back into Spanish or some other language to have our discussion as we drive forward. So we're getting down to the last couple minutes. I will point out we haven't had any questions yet, but if anybody has questions, you can feel free to throw them in the chat if you have not yet. And with hitting those last couple minutes, the last question always for these type of webinars is, what emerging trends or technology do you see playing a pivotal role in DevSecOps practices, particularly as they apply to multi-cloud over the next couple of years? So Mark, we'll let you go first.
Okay. So, everybody's talking about AI these days. So clearly, the complexities of, multi-cloud AI has definitely got lots of applications there. And I see more and more folks embracing AI. Pretty much every tool vendor has an AI roadmap if they don't have an AI implementation yet. And those that have the roadmap say that it's just around the corner. So I guess AI is, certainly taking advantage of these large language models and in different forms is becoming kind of table stakes for tool vendors.
Are the
And
cloud AIs I have in Azure and Amazon going to fight with each other over what I want with results?
probably, yeah. But other than that, it's things like, there's a lot of use cases with serverless and, at least being able to accelerate recovery and things like that. The zero trust models, the different cloud vendors have different models. So having a unified model, I think, is going to become more important. Um, some of the, things like edge computing and IoT opens up new opportunities for problems in security, and coming up with a unified approach to that, I think, is going to be more and more important as well. Of course, if you talk to any one of the security vendors, they'll say they already have solutions for everything, but so far I still see those solutions forming rather than being real.
I would say I agree with a lot of those service meshes for, obviously zero trust networking on highly distributed and highly federated systems. Also, a lot of tools that are going to be looking at those highly federated systems would be like AI tools are definitely much bigger. Obviously, I work for a company that does a lot of AI tools. So we do things like logging and monitoring for predictive analytics. Also, obviously, with including some automated security stuff. I think, like as the different AI models are being trained, we can actually see like what the most likely attack vectors would be coming into different systems. And it's all about sort of that anomaly detection for us in terms of AI. Obviously, I think you had touched upon, what else did you touch on? I feel like it was something else about edge computing.
Edge computing
So
and IoT.
yeah, IoT integrating with all of those cloud architectures is definitely becoming much more of a big thing. When I worked at Xilinx, which then now is AMD, like there's definitely been a push for edge computing. Like all these cloud service providers are also like Amazon is buying the actual hardware now and then having people basically like borrow the hardware so that you can actually do all kinds of edge computing and IoT things. And now they're deploying, they're using Kubernetes essentially to deploy all kinds of code, without using an operating system onto all of these different devices. So like the bare metal edge computing stuff is definitely becoming like much more of a real thing. I've also had a lot of really interesting conversations with people, I think, at like not just at the cloud service provider level, but even on like the hardware components level, because they have to think about how to secure the bit streams and how to secure, because you can like spoof or copy the bit streams that go into the devices, and like those bit streams might be running some proprietary AI or machine learning models that they don't want people to just copy. So then you have to also add encryption to the hardware, and you have to think about like there's a lot of really interesting problems that you run into from a security standpoint at that point.
Future perspective, I have to add that I always like some of the trends towards platform engineering, right? Or having a DevSecOps platform that does all those things for you at the lead end so that you can quickly get to building your applications and doing the things that generate you revenue. If you're using a multi-cloud, you can select Azure, AWS, or Google, and then it will configure it or for the different Kubernetes environments or whatever the different tools are. Security compliance levels. I need a NIST security compliance level that's ready to deploy in AWS that has a limited number of people in making those kind of injections, right? And then I can put the person who wants to build an app right onto building the app rather than having spend 6 months or a year getting everything up and running on that back end before they can push things forward to their customer, making the changes right away with known good and known secure type things. But thank you all for joining me. Thank you, audience, for joining me today. We very much appreciated your time. I hope you enjoyed this conversation in considering the relationship between multi-clouds and DevSecOps. Big thanks to our panelists, Melissa and Mark, for joining us. I've enjoyed the time today. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Please take the survey that's in there as well. There's a 1-minute survey that's in the handout section, if you could. And with that, I'll say good day and have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you may be in the world as you join us. Thank you again.